Theodore Roosevelt, the Rough Rider, the cowboy president, the man whose face towers on Mount Rushmore. He is remembered as America's great champion of strength, courage, and rugged nationalism. And yet, when it came to the Irish, Roosevelt's feelings were as wild and contradictory as the man himself. On one hand, he praised the Scotch-Irish, whose blood and faith he shared as warriors and poets. He wrote that they were that stern and virile people, the very kernel of America's fighting stock. But in the same breath, his private diaries spat venom about Irish Catholics whom he disparaged like many Protestants of his day. He sneered that the Irish in politics were a stupid, sodden, vicious, venal, corrupt, unintelligent brutes. He praised their bravery and hardiness and welcomed their blood on the battlefield, but despised their politics. So which was it? Were the Irish Roosevelt's chosen heroes, or his favourite punching bag? To answer that, we must step back into the America of his time, an America where the Irish were soldiers and poets, but also drunks and traitors in the eyes of many. By the 19th century, Irish Catholics had become one of the largest immigrant groups in America. They laid railroads, built cities, filled factories, but they carried with them a terrible burden: hatred. Shop windows posted, "No Irish need apply." Cartoonist Thomas Nast sketched them as ape-like brutes, violent, drunken, unfit for democracy. Protestant elites whispered that Irish Catholics were loyal not to Washington, but to Rome. And when Irish immigrants began to climb the political ladder in America's big cities, their success was quickly branded as corruption. Their political machines handed out food, found jobs, and looked after the poor. But to the wealthy elite, this wasn't charity, it was bribery. It was backroom deals, whiskey-soaked meetings, and votes traded like currency. The most famous of these machines was Tammany Hall in New York, run largely by Irish Catholic politicians, loved by the poor, despised by the elite. The Ku Klux Klan, a Protestant group born out of fear of outsiders, initially targeted and terrorized black Americans. But as Irish Catholics grew in numbers and political power, the Klan's hatred turned toward them. To the Klan, the Irish were not white enough, not loyal enough, not American enough. They were branded as alien intruders, untrustworthy foreigners, a people whose true allegiance lay with Rome and the Pope. Irish churches were threatened, Irish parades were attacked, and Irish neighborhoods lived under the shadow of suspicion. In the eyes of the hooded mobs, the Irish Catholic was not part of the American story. He was a danger to it. By the time Roosevelt entered politics, the Irish in America were already a paradox. The loyal soldier in uniform, the untrustworthy voter in the city, praised for their labor and courage, despised for their politics and faith. Roosevelt, a historian by instinct, was fascinated with the Irish story. In the winning of the West, he poured special praise on the Scotch-Irish, the Ulster Protestants who crossed the Atlantic and carved out their place on the frontier. These were the people he claimed as his own forebears, and it showed. He exalted them as the toughest pioneers, the very kernel of America's fighting stock. He wrote that stern and virile people, the Irish, formed the kernel of the distinctively and intensely American stock. To Roosevelt, these pioneers were everything he admired: tough, independent, courageous, and warlike. But when it comes to Irish Catholics, his feelings were more divided and conflicted. At a friendly Sons of St. Patrick banquet, he declared the Irish pioneers the advance guard of conquering civilization. He also became a champion of Irish culture. In his essay, The Ancient Irish Sagas, he insisted, chairs of Celtic should be established in our leading universities. He praised the fierce beauty of Irish myths, Cuchulainn, the Red Branch warriors, the poetry of Ireland's ancient soul. He befriended Lady Augusta Gregory, praising her book Cuchulainn of Merthimna, and defended the Abbey Theatre during riots in 1911, calling it a vigorous expression of Irish life, so honourable to the Irish people. But notice who Roosevelt chose to praise. The Irish heroes in his writings were the Scotch-Irish Protestants of the frontier, his own bloodline. His cultural allies were Anglo-Irish Protestants like Lady Gregory. For Irish Catholics, Roosevelt reserved suspicion. He admired their courage in war, but he never celebrated their leaders, their priests, or their politicians. To Roosevelt, the Irish worth admiring were Protestants. Behind closed doors, Roosevelt's pen dripped venom. In the 1880s, as a young legislator in Albany, he clashed with Irish Democrats daily. His diary from those years is blistering. They are a stupid, sodden, vicious lot, most of them being equally deficient in brains and virtue. And he added more venomously, the average Catholic Irishman of the first generation as represented in this assembly is a low, venal, corrupt and unintelligent brute who could not string 3 intelligible sentences together. That was Roosevelt's raw private verdict. His battles with Tammany Hall and with Irish bosses like Richard Croker hardened his hatred. To him, Irish-American politics was democracy at its ugliest. Bought votes, corruption, whiskey-soaked wardrooms. Religion only deepened the wound. Roosevelt admired Irish myth, but Irish Catholicism made his blood boil. He feared the priests, portraying them as foreign agents of Rome, manipulating American life. In Roosevelt's mind, the Irish carried ballots in one hand and rosaries in the other, and both were suspect. His ultimatum was blunt. We welcome the Irishman who becomes an American. We have no use for the Irishman who remains such. For Roosevelt, Irish culture was noble, Irish politics was poison. If Roosevelt's diaries were venom, his public speeches became cannon fire. In 1915, addressing the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic audience filled with Irish faces, he thundered, "There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. The man who calls himself an Irish American or a German American is not an American at all. He is a traitor to American institutions." The message was unmistakable. If you clung to your old identity, you were not just different, you were dangerous. If you called yourself an Irish American, a German American, or any kind of hyphenated American, you were no true American at all. You were a traitor, an enemy within the gates. For millions of immigrants, this was a knife to the heart. They had bled for America, built its railroads, raised its cities. But Roosevelt was telling them that unless they stripped away every trace of their old self, their language, their culture, their identity, they could never truly belong. And the Irish Catholics? They did not rally to Roosevelt. For decades, they had been the backbone of the Democratic Party, tied to the political machines of New York, Boston and Chicago. Roosevelt's relentless attacks on those machines only deepened the divide. In 1904, he swept the nation in a landslide, carrying almost every state. But in Irish Catholic neighborhoods, the votes tilted heavily against him. To many Irish families, Roosevelt was the Protestant reformer who mocked their ways, despised their politics, and questioned their loyalty to America. As World War I raged, Roosevelt's fury intensified. Irish Americans resisted fighting for Britain, the same Britain occupying their homeland. Roosevelt lumped them with German Americans, branding both groups as enemies within. Even John Redmond, the Irish leader pushing for home rule, found no support. Roosevelt admired Irish cultural revival but dismissed Irish independence as reckless. Celebrate sagas, yes. Demand freedom while Britain bled? Treason. The man who once praised Irish courage was now calling Irish Americans cowards, even traitors. And here lies Roosevelt's paradox. He loved Irish blood spilled for America, soldiers, pioneers, warriors. But Irish ballots cast in American cities? He saw them as corruption, danger, treachery. He exalted the heroes of Irish myth, but despised the Irish neighbours who lived down his street. He exalted Cuchulainn, but sneered at Croker. He praised Lady Gregory, but scorned the Irish priest, heroes in legend, soldiers in war, suspects as citizens. That was Theodore Roosevelt's Irish verdict. Roosevelt's contradictions were not just his own, they were America's. Celebrate immigrant culture? Yes. Use immigrant labour in factories and wars? Absolutely. But trust immigrants with power, with ballots, with loyalty? That was always the breaking point. In Roosevelt's time, the suspect group was the Irish. Later, it was Italians, then Jews, then Mexicans, Muslims and others. Different faces, same suspicion. Roosevelt's Irish paradox is the American paradox, the eternal love-hate story of immigration. Theodore Roosevelt, the Rough Rider, the American lion, never settled his quarrel with the Irish. He adored their myths, praised their warriors, defended their poets, but in politics, in religion, in loyalty, he spat venom and suspicion. For Roosevelt, the Irish were heroes in legend, soldiers in war, but never fully trusted as citizens of the Republic.